Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I'm Gabriel Rosenfeld. I'm the president here at the Center for Jewish History. And tonight, of course, we're honored to host a screening of June Zero and to have director Jake Paltrow be with us to share his insights about what is truly a remarkable film. June Zero provides us with a new opportunity to rethink the impact of the trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1961-62 on Israeli society. And what's interesting about the film, as you'll see, is that it focuses on some new perspectives in the form of very unusual characters that figure centrally in the film, including Adolf Eichmann's Moroccan Jewish prison guard, an Israeli police investigator who also happens to be a Polish Jewish Holocaust survivor, and a precocious 13-year-old Libyan Jewish immigrant. Jake is known for a bunch of achievements as a director. His films all feature compelling storytelling, whether such narrative films as The Good Night and Young Ones. He's also been very involved in television and has been an Emmy-nominated director in that medium as well. Tonight's screening, as you all know, will be followed by a conversation between Jake and Isaac Zablocki, who's the Senior Director of Film Programs in the Israel Film Center at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. And we'll, of course, welcome all your questions, and presumably you'll get some answers to those questions. With that, we can dim the lights and start the film. So thank you again for coming.
Please welcome to the stage Jake Paltrow and Isaac Zablocki.
Okay, it's working? Oh, good. Yeah, I didn't know, Isaac. Thank you all so much for coming and staying.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for this wonderful film. We have much to ask, but we want to make you a part of this conversation as well. So start preparing your questions as well. But let's start from the beginning and tell us a little bit about what made you want to make this film.
Well, I no intention of making a movie in a language I don't really speak in a faraway country at the height of a pandemic or anything, but the story sort of, it grabbed me. It was the detail of the one-time use crematorium was so fascinating, even just as a one-sentence thing. You think of Eichmann, you think of the diabolical crimes in a scale that you can't quite, ever metabolize. And then this idea of a culture and religion with no cremation, tasked to build an oven for these, political and legal considerations. So inherently, at least by my estimation, or what I'm attracted to, is sort of dramatic, inherently dramatic, without having to try to rub these elements up against each other, in an artificial way to sort of create sparks. And so the deeper I went into it, these other parts of the story opened up, and then the next biggest one, of course, is that this, now older man claiming that when he was a young boy that he worked at this factory. And so we set up a sort of research trip in Israel where I interviewed on film a number of the living participants, and out of that became a much deeper story that I had a sort of more fictional idea of what this would be, and then in getting to talk to everybody, I realized it went much, much deeper and become a much more emotional thing. And also that I needed a collaborator. I wanted to work with somebody. I found Tom Cheval, who's a great writer and director, who Isaac knows. And I realized there was just a cultural layer that I didn't feel I could penetrate on my own. And so we wrote it together. And only through the process of writing it did we sort of figure out that it should be in Hebrew, that I should do it, in the language that it kind of all took place in. And I mean, Tom was very confident about it through the process, and I had wonderful producers, one of whom is here, Ron Goldman, whose father, Mickey Goldman, is portrayed in the movie as Micha Aronson, in the Poland section of the film, and Mickey is still with us in Ramat Gan at 99, and trusted us with his story, and he's.
It's rare to find a film. It's such a group effort. It really feels like you brought together a whole crew to work on this.
Very much so. I mean, I think you hear it a lot with filmmakers. If you come to these screenings, people, oh, it's a collaborative process and something. In a case like this, you know, where you're translating scripts back and forth a number of times to get it to sound the way you want it to, but you wouldn't necessarily know what it is, and you're trusting people and relying on them, to help you get through it. I think it's probably the best expression of the really collaborative kind of thing in that way, because you're sort of out on a limb in a way I had never been before, and you're sort of using every last intuitive, part of yourself.
So I'm going to go back to our last question where you were talking about doing the decision to do this in Hebrew. And it's really interesting. Like, there have been those, actually even classically, American-made movies in Israel that capture Israel in a certain way and will have it also like have everybody speak either in funny accents or just not get the Hebrew right. So, something is always off there. One of my compliments that I've given you many times about this film is that you managed to capture Israel as somebody who grew up there in I think a very authentic way.
Good.
You have it down. Nobody's doing things in strange accents that are not supposed to be there. But also even, and this is the really interesting side to me, cinematically, you grabbed what Israel looks like in film from the early days of Israel, and you kind of present Israel. You didn't make Israel Americanized. You actually made Israel Israelized.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I love that you see it sort of that way. I mean, also, I think a big part of the movie is, Israel has an amazing cinematic history that is very, very underviewed. And when the film was showing at the Quad, we showed Policeman Azulai and we showed Yuri Zohar's Big Eyes. We were trying to show some of the movies, not that they're directly related in any way or the stories are similar, but to show a kind of, philosophical, familial thing about the tone and the time and the way things are sort of made, especially at this. I mean, in our movie, it's a sort of sweet spot moment, sort of between wars. There's you have this mass immigration. You have, it's a moment of a brief moment of calm. But anyway, the cinematic part very much comes from the Israeli cinema and Kishan and those are movies that I love and should be seen more widely. And I think the movie's informed a lot, sort of by that and some of the stars of the era and the way that they sort of communicated their screen personas and those things, and trying to find that in our own casting process. So, and Tom and I talking about those movies and what that will be like. And then, of course, having this, Eitan Levy is a great production designer, who's 81 years old and has lived through all of it. And so to have that person helping you, physicalize these ideas, and without just, posting a big lookbook on the wall and saying, well, can we make everything look like this? And really talking about what it would be like, and, if it's coming out of Histadrut and you're doing the thing, and what would it be like? I mean, you're really getting into the fun stuff, the details of what these environments are like and how people would get these jobs and who would be working there and that sort of stuff.
And it's so often that's how you can make a movie wrong, not knowing those details. And you lent in and borrowed authenticity to the film by bringing in all these people. Let me jump into another topic, if I may, because I think as a Holocaust film, which I don't know if we want to call it that. I'm not saying that this is a Holocaust film, and you could tell me if it is or not. Obviously relates a little bit, but breaks completely. And I give a shout out for those who haven't seen A Real Pain yet. Another film that's, this is the Jesse Eisenberg film, another film that's kind of taking a post-Holocaust look at and relating. I don't know if to call it a Holocaust cinema or not, but it fits in the book somewhere. There were so many ways to approach, and we've seen so many ways that the Holocaust has been approached in a film, and never has it been told this way. We could go as specifically as Eichmann. There has been so much done about Eichmann. When I first heard this was being made, I said, "Oh no, another just what we need, another Eichmann film." We saw Ben Kingsley already. Yes. It's gotten, but it's the opposite. You take us into the smallest part of the Eichmann story in many ways, and dive in deep. and you treat the Holocaust in a way that also I haven't seen too often in cinema in terms of the approach of how to tell the story. Tell us a little bit about that decision of how to approach this story in terms of the Holocaust.
I mean, I think there are a lot of, I think it's probably a plural thing, approaches. You know, the movie is dedicated to Claude Lanzmann, and, you know, aside from being this obviously amazing documentarian who, you know, he's a cinematic legend. I mean, you know, he sets out to make a 1-year, 1-hour documentary about the Holocaust that nobody had really done yet, and becomes a 10-year production of a 10-hour thing. And what he does is he realizes that that this idea of first-person testimony and will drive this history in a way that that so many people don't even know very much about in 1970 or whenever it's shown. But he does no archival footage and no recreation of the horrors, and it makes it, at least to me, so contemporary. No matter when you watch the movie, you feel like you're with these people and you are understanding it. You know, so whether it's perpetrators or bystanders or victims or whatever it is, it feels so direct and so alive and everything else. And Tom and I would talk about this a lot. You know, is there anything about that cinematic language, which is of course very, very different, but is there anything in that cinematic language that we could bring to a narrative movie, in this thing? Now, of course, the interviews of the living participants is driving what we're doing. You know, we find the claim of the young boy's claim. You know, we meet Mickey Goldman, and we start to talk to one of the guards who is in the prison. And as the tales are being told, we realize, well, out of this will be the story. So I don't want to, I don't love the based on true, this is a true story sort of thing. I understand it from a movie poster, but if you notice, it's not in the movie itself. So yes, it's approximating these things that we're being told that are these people's histories, but like, what does the truth in that stuff mean so much? And I think Lanzmann in the documentary does that so beautifully, because it's a bit in the collective that you will bring it's what's inferred. You know what I mean? It's out of it. You reflect upon your prior knowledge and then your experience of the material and come to it that way. For me, I respond to that, so much in sort of what he did. And I think in a way, what we end up with is this conversation about cinematic language and stuff that Tom and I are really interested in. We're very good friends, and we talk all the time, and we're working on other things together. And so it's an intuitive thing of finding how it will be, but we're so blessed because people are trusting us with their stories out of this. As it applies to the Eichmann thing, I think I feel the same way, and it's why he's so minimized. I mean, almost to the point of really not showing him at all. And I think that was something that we discussed, which is like, even if we could psychoanalyze him and understand him, what the hell would that mean now? I mean, it's all happened. And out of it comes, what? For us to, be able to, I mean, that's another thing Tom and I would talk about, is like to call him a monster, to call it like that. No. The whole point is that he's a person, and this process of keeping him alive before these characters decide when he will ultimately be killed kind of rehumanizes him, which is something we talked about. And I mean that literally. I don't mean in his personality or find the depths in his soul. I mean, he's met sitting on the toilet. Mm-hmm. He's watched breathing in the way you would an infant child. And the process of doing that highlights all of his humanness, which is so important to remember with the people that do these things, and not scapegoat it with animals and monsters and all that language that we hear about people who are capable of these things. So these are, I mean, I could go on and on about the facets that Tom and I are, talking about and playing with as we write the thing. But I think, that's the whole point, I think, of making something like this.
And it plays into Hannah Arendt, of course, and the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or sort of pushing against whatever that, is in its own way,
But definitely a lot of banality there, and not really evil. It's like, you're seeing a guy.
Yes.
And it's fascinating. Also, I was talking to my kids about this movie tonight when they were asking me what I was doing, and this is there's a proud moment for Israel here. There's this, they took Eichmann, and it was like, you could have him. They could have had him shot right there. Never bring him back to Israel, but to give him a trial and then to find the right way to end his life, which is something that's like very untraditional in Israel. Was actually, I'd say Israel today, I don't know if they're as thoughtful as they were back then. It was like Israel wants to make sure this is done in the cleanest, most kosher way, right?
Again, so many ways we could sort of access that observation. I think for like when you talk to Mickey Goldman and we dramatize it a bit in the movie, one of the things he talks about is like it's the moment the dam of shame falls on this subject in Israel. There's a group of people arriving after the war, and the majority of the people already living there saying, you let this happen to you. That's the general feeling, is you let, without, it's so impossible to understand, and then this trial plays every day on the radio, and people are listening to it, and through the process, totally understanding what happened. And so Mickey's story as it relates to that thing for me is sort of the whole thing as it applies to that part of, I think, the culture at the time as it would be, for the Eichmann trial.
Why is it important for people, this is a little bit for the audience, but why is it important for audiences to see this film now? As a filmmaker, you're telling a story, you're not just, it's not a leaf falling in the forest, you need, people need to see this film. Why is it important for people to hear this story now?
Well, I think you hear it, it's sort of what you said about, another Eichmann thing. I think in this the so-called subgenre of the Holocaust movie, sometimes you feel like you will hear this amongst groups of, another sort of movie in this area. But when if you think about it for just even a moment, it's like we're not back to whole in terms of the population of the people. So if all the people who were annihilated, that this subject matter touched all the people who survived, or you even think of something like the claims conference that exists for the people who have no family. There is no one to litigate on the behalf of all of these things. So I think it speaks to the vastness of the subject matter still touching so many living people. Then you can go into it from a religious perspective. If you think about, Mickey's 99, we only have so much time here. Ron's very young, he's in this rare sort of category, but, even the children of survivors are also a generation away from not being with us anymore. So even from a religious perspective, if you're talking about saying Kaddish or something, if this is something we're going to hang on to, and there aren't people to sort of do it in the traditional way, I think that's also a part of. It's a side effect. It's not what's driving me to necessarily make the movie, but these are other ways to look at it. So depending on what the things in your life, what the things that are important to you, there are different ways to, I think, look at people who are interested still in making movies about the subject matter and doing it in a different way. And I think that becomes the challenge, and in a way a bit the mandate to not, you're not going to be able to do movies where you're re-examining the actual crimes or the horrors better than Schindler's List, or Son of Saul, or one of these kinds of movies. Those are monumental and introduce people to this history. So many people that didn't know anything about it beforehand. I don't think you can do it better than that. And so meaning in the art form is then it doesn't need to be done again. Those can stand on there. There's there's a reason we don't remake It's a Wonderful Life. You know what I mean? I think, God forbid. But you know what I mean? And I think that's the same thing. So working in the area, being interested, of course, is essential, and finding new ways to do it.
I could ask many more, but I already see a hand up, which is great. We're going to pass the microphone around. It's coming, and in the meantime, I'll ask another question, if I may. I'm taking the time.
Please.
Memory. Memory is a big theme here in the film. I think it was Descartes who said, if you're not on Wikipedia, then it's not true. And I'm on Wikipedia, therefore I am. Is that something you're exploring here? What is truth in our modern world? Which, by the way, sorry, I have to go back to this. I remember now mentioning this last time we spoke, that the colors of the old Tel Aviv and the new Tel Aviv in that last scene. That last scene, in some ways, just adjusts all the other colors for me in such a beautiful way. So I think it's a really powerful scene. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that scene.
You know, at one point we thought, did we need it? And it was something I sort of wrestled with. But in a way, I think what you're talking about is exactly the sort of point of these ideas of, who gets to ratify these claims, and so when you think of testimonies that relate to something like the Holocaust and having the collective testimonies, when you think of the Shoah Foundation or these things, and then you have David's story, and then you have one person with no one really to corroborate it, and the last thing is this. I don't know what you call Wikipedia, a website, a tech company, or whatever it ultimately is. I mean, I think that's the way most people now are getting their information. So, when we looked into it, Wikipedia in Israel actually does work differently, from my understanding, than it does in other places. And there is a board. I don't know if you read the story. Bibi Netanyahu has another son who sort of stays out of the spotlight, and he went to Wikipedia last year or earlier this year and said, "You have to remove me. I don't want to be a part of a public anything." And I guess the board of Wikipedia in Israel, wait a second, well, he's the son of this thing. And they voted, this group, and they agreed to remove the other Netanyahu.
He doesn't exist anymore.
Whatever. Well, it doesn't exist in this way that he didn't want to exist. So if this is the other side, really asserting your place in this thing in the way that he did, which is what, and when we talked to him, he said, well, why are you asserting this sort of now? He said, well, the real Shlomi, he told us not to say anything. And he said, right, so you sat on for 50 years, and so, yeah.
Thank you. Let's take some questions from the audience. We got a hand up right there.
Thank you. This is the second time I've seen the film, and I learned a lot. If you could just two questions. One is about to explain June Zero, the title, and the background music of Sunrise, Sunset. Any comments on why you selected?
Yeah, which one is Sunrise, Sunset?
It's often, it permeates throughout the film.
Oh.
I hear stuff from Fiddler on the Roof.
I could sing, but we don't want that.
I'd like to. This may be one of these things where Ariel Marks, who did our score. Yeah, I mean, it isn't. I mean, not intentionally. If it's in the ballpark of a thing, but anyway. What was the first question? Oh, in talking to somebody, there was somebody from the prison service who told us that someone had logged the execution moment. He was hanged May 31st at midnight, and that someone logged it somewhere as June 0, Uni Ephes. They put it in a thing as this sort of gesture, to sort of like decommemorate a moment, but it really lands as quite a commemoration, was sort of the idea. So I think that was something that came up in the process of making it. We made it sort of under a different title, and in the process we realized, oh, it's more this than it is this process of just making. It was originally Hatanur, the oven, was the script title, and then making it, realizing that it's about something maybe a little bit more than that.
I love the title. I remember correctly that the magazine had the date on the magazine of it being June.
Exactly.
Is that true?
No. So we flipped it. So exactly. So this detail that we got from the prison service, we then put to, so our magazine is based on a version of Haolam Hazeh. I don't know if we're getting to real inside baseball,
Anyone
Israeli
familiar
pop
with Haolam
culture
Hazeh?
stuff. Yuri Avneri, is this ultra left-wing, firebrand sort of journalist, ultimately politician. I think, Arafat's favorite interviewer, one of these, guys who's doing, very provocative stuff, going up to government ministers and asking them a question about, their wife's pantyhose, and they, go at him with their thing, and he takes a picture and attributes it to some other story thing, and then has these sort of pornographic things in it and everything else. Anyway, we gave it to our vision of sort of his magazine, in the movie. So this is where the true story part gets dicey.
It's allowed. It's a movie.
Where did you find that little boy?
I mean, divine, So there's a casting director in Israel that I really wanted to work with, that I'd seen. She has this. Her name's Hila Yuval, and she's has this ability of casting there's sort of a group chemistry. And we knew we had this sort of large cast, and certainly the people at the factory, you wanted this to work well. And I had said to her, if we don't have a boy, we have no movie. And she went out and started finding, kids who hadn't acted. And one day she sends me this video, and it's Noam, who I think had maybe gone to like a local theater group or something to inquire about. Anyway, he sent this tape in, and his entire spirit and energy and emotional truth and all was there right off the bat. His unusualness and his sweetness and everything about him is sort of right there. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness. And so Rotem Kanan, who's a very well-known actor in Israel, who plays the teacher in our movie, is also this very well-known acting teacher. And so we started an audition process with Noam and Rotem, where we would talk about the things we wanted to achieve. And over the months as we were preparing the movie, they would kind of come back and show me where they were at with sort of the thing. And he just became this amazing actor in the process of kind of auditioning for the movie. But we knew he'd do it. We kind of knew he'd be the one, but could he cover all of these things? And they had such an amazing working relationship. And Noam at the time didn't really speak English. So my communication was very much with Rotem, the acting teacher. And so we kind of built that in this, like an acting department, really. I mean, that's how we would always talk about it that way.
We have a question here. We want to give him the mic.
Intentional question. It's about the boy. Was the movie Andrei Rublev like something you thought about, or because that movie has the boy who doesn't know if he can build the bell. Spoiler alert.
As you say it, I'd like to say yes, and of course I love that movie. But no, that was not one that factored in, and maybe directly. Abbas Kiarostami, made a lot of these movies with children. He's a great Iranian director, and I remember when we started talking about some of the nature of what the boy would kind of be like. We were looking at this movie, which we showed at the Quad when we were doing the Traveler, which was lost, and then they found a tape of it or something. And there's an amazing kid in that one, and that was the only. It was funny. Tom and I really tried to make an effort to not, to try to fight the influences a bit. I think they're very heavy within us, as starting as young people who really like movies, and sometimes you really want to leave that stuff behind a bit. And I think that was one of the few sort of references where we would say, like, well, we could take a peek at this one and see how they were kind of working in that way. But yeah, not Andrei Rublev, but that's of course a great one.
And there's a strong history of that in Israeli cinema too, of the stories of the 1950s, 60s being told through the eyes of a boy. A whole generation of filmmakers, I guess, told their childhood stories in that way. So there's a lot to refer to there, and you can't ignore it. It's a part of you.
They're not available here very much, like 3 Days of the Child and some of these great ones, there from there. You can't get them.
Yep.
So there was you mentioned a real pain, and there was a scene that struck me with the conversation between Mickey and the woman.
Ada, yeah.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it was a love interest, but then it's like, I don't know, because I don't know what happens if they split up. But it was an interesting point where she was making that her concern was that of never again becomes always remember, and there was a touristy, and there was a scene from A Real Pain where they're at the at a cemetery, and one of the characters just like calls out or questions the factoid of the tour guide, where he's like, it was more like touristy, and he was like, oh, these are real people, these are not like facts and figures. And he was embarrassing his cousin. But what is that to say about the comment that what her objection was she was raising with this why he shouldn't come out and say his story?
I mean, I think these are the questions that Tom and I sort of have in our own conversations. And it's almost a way of like dramatizing the stuff that we're thinking about. And as we wrote that one, you know, I think a big part of it was also, you know, two people having very opposed ideas about something. And, you know, one is much more intellectual and one is, of course, very experiential and everything else. But it's done in this emotional and sort of dignified way, and that these two people could somehow move closer together, but without having really a resolution. Do you know what I mean? But there's an understanding about the thing with really interesting, important, provocative questions about the subject matter.
Right after October 7th, and there was a survivor from Italy who was questioning like her whole life's work about the Holocaust, and she was saying that it's almost like nothing what I did ever, did anything, because there was a big rise of anti-Semitism. So I was wondering, I was thinking of that into what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a way of us getting into a subject matter that we're not really trying to figure out. And that in a way, you know, I wish more people talked about this kind of stuff, you know, in general, and certainly in a public way, and certainly in movies, and you know, and I love the provocative nature of it, and you know, and that's part of the thing of the tone of the movie as it shifts a bit. We set it up a bit like, you know, a sort of European art house romantic. You think it's going to be one thing, and then it's very much a different thing, but in what it ultimately is, that these people somehow come closer together, even though they're so different.
I have to add on to this that this whole concept of never forget is, you have to understand the why. Well, it's not just about remembering. It's not just about having memory there. To me, it's also about understanding, why do we need to remember? What are the lessons we could bring to today about it? What's relevant to us? What can we make sure never happens again? And just putting it as memory alone and as history alone, frankly, for me, is not enough. We'll take one last question here.
Thank you very much for this. When did you first start working on this? And if you could also describe the process of what it took to get this produced. And lastly, what were your expectations of its being exposed to an audience?
Well, yeah, I'll start with the last part. I think, at least for me, in making these things, you know, there's something a little crazy about it, because it's obviously unusual subject matter and a language I don't. So the thinking of how will it connect, I think what you're telling yourself is, it's like a very youthful sort of madness where you say, wait till they see it. You know, wait till they see this one, kind of thing. Because I think if you sat down and really thought it through in terms of, you might not do it. And so that really drives it. It's a bit, you know, people often talk about, you know, making movies, oh, this is my baby sort of thing. This is different. This is more like, you know, the woman I'm going to marry or something. I can do this forever. I can feel the same way about it, you know, the day we start kind of writing it or researching it, as I'll feel about it, you know, today on the stage, you know, talking to you guys after you've seen it. And I think that's what drives, you know, it's not unique to necessarily this movie. I think it's, you know, at least for me, unique to movie making process. When you find the story that you want to do that you can stick with for a really long time. And so getting it actually made, you know, Ron was very involved in that part of the process. Oren Moverman, who lives right nearby, was our other producer. You know, they really figured out how to do it, and we were able to do it really properly. I mean, we also, you know, I shoot on film, and no one had shot on film in Israel in like 10 or 12 years, and that was, you know, a whole thing of getting the film, the cameras, the thing, and also finding that people can do this and shipping the film to Romania. I mean, I definitely put them in.
There are no labs in Israel.
No lab. There are no labs in so many places now where you do this, where you have to ship the film. So I definitely put them out on a limb here, you know, but it worked out. I mean, all of that part of it worked out, you know, well enough to finish it.
Are you sure you're not wanted in Israel somewhere? They're like, this American director comes in, shoots on film.
No, it's funny. They really once I remember because there was a lot of concern about it, and really the shipping back and forth and everything else, and something would happen. But I remember when we finally got the first week's stuff back, and we could have watched it properly on the big screen the first week of dailies, which you don't do for the rest of it. And I remember the people that were sort of not only relieved, sort of elated, by it, elated by the way that it looked, and feeling like, oh, he's not crazy, and feeling really pleased by that. And that was very gratifying, of course, because you always want to be right.
Before we say goodnight, what's next for you?
Tom and I wrote, we have another one, not in Hebrew, an American thing that's, I think, funny. And so hopefully we'll be doing it fairly soon.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you all, folks, for being a part of this.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Please, Isaac, thank you again. It's so great to talk to you always about the movies.
Have a good night, everyone. Get some rest.